Hello and welcome back to my channel and joining me for the first in the series dealing with my RuneQuest Classic Edition solo campaign. I'm very pleased to get this up and running. The plan for this episode is really just a kind of an introduction. I want to try and go over what my objectives are for my solo campaign. Maybe just run through some of the influences that have shaped how I'm going to approach the game and how I used to play it, and maybe my experience of actually playing, how immersed I was in the game itself, in the world of Glorantha, what kind of modules we experienced, what sort of depth we went into with the actual game world, and then I finally, just to kind of wrap up and say, why I really like this game so much, how it's so special. It's very different from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That's what I really want to do with this campaign, is to have a completely different kind of fantasy experience, and hopefully when I'm going through all of my notes that I've been pulling together to go through this game, you'll be able to see why it differentiates from the solo Advanced Dungeons and Dragons campaign I've been running, and I'm going to really try to make it quite a distinct and separate offering, which I think will be quite an interesting spin on the fantasy genre. After all, it is RuneQuest in essence is in a different type of fantasy setting. It's primarily based on a Bronze Age, pre-feudal, pre-medieval environment, world setting. It's immersed in the impact of the religious communities and gods and divine intervention and mythology. That's much more heavy and intense in the RuneQuest environment, whereas in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, it's maybe a bit more low key, and it's emphasizing some of the martial side, the magic, and much more emphasis on things like dungeon delving and exploration. Whereas RuneQuest is more about maybe the exploration of characters going on a journey, trying to become the best at what they can do, to reach the highest levels in their chosen cult or profession, and using the skill system and the experience system to get them to that point. So I'm going to be using this Classic Edition. This is the RuneQuest Classic Edition, which is basically RuneQuest version 2, the version that was produced in 1978 by Chaosium, and they've done a nice, beautiful reprint of it in this leather-bound copy, and we've got showing off to its glory these lovely pages, silky pages. It's beautiful stuff, and this comes to, I think in total, about 120 odd pages, no, 144 pages now. There is some additional bits. They've got some additional appendices, and there's a few inserts from here we go, a few more rambling rune questions. So they've gone to I think the design that was actually maintained in parallel with the game's development was called Worm's Footnotes, and there was a questions page, and they've actually managed to insert some of those into the actual text, which is really nice. You get to see what was the current kind of discussion points and points of interest and clarification that were wanted. This is a lovely book. It's got everything in it, and that's the beauty of the RuneQuest system. It's a really all contained. Everything you need is kind of contained in this book. So I'm not planning to go anywhere else. I'm just going to be using this. This version comes with a very nice set of appendices, and you get these kind of player notes that have got all the tables on it. you know, the things like treasure, all the skills listed and the cost of training. We've got, what else have we got? We've got this combat thing. You can see the beauty of the combat system, you know, the fumble table. Isn't that a glorious sight? The famous RuneQuest character sheet. This is the Mark IV version. It sounds like a tank. This is where it all happens. This is the powerhouse of the game. The characters and character sheets. You get some summary stuff. It goes on, and then of course there's the classic setting. And I'm not sure if you're going to be disappointed or not, but I'm actually not going to use the classic setting of Glorantha. I'm gonna explain why as we go through the. You know, not that I dislike the setting. I think it's wonderful, and it's a bit with my Traveller campaign. I'm not using the Third Imperium setting, and I've done that deliberately because I just want to generate my own using my solo game, and just see where that takes me. So I'm going to do the same with RuneQuest. Okay, and then you get these nice. I think some of the cults that you might be familiar with, Lankamai, Orlanth. And I had a lot of Orlanth characters. The Zaris, I liked the Zaris. They were good traders. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is I've created some notes of what basically my terms of reference are for this game, and I'm quite happy just to run through these high level, and maybe just point out some of the key aspects, and hopefully this will give you an indication of where I'm coming from, what I want to achieve from this series, and what kind of game I'm trying to create over the next how many months it takes to get to where we can reach a point where we can stand back and say, yeah, we've achieved X, Y, and Z, and see how that tallies up to where I think I should be. So as you know, the title says it itself. It's the RuneQuest Classic Edition solo campaign. And I want to do everything based on, there's no real solo mechanisms in RuneQuest, so I'm just going to have to generate them all myself. I don't want to use a commercial set of solo rules. It's the same with my AD&D one and my Traveller one. I'm just using anything that I have got to hand myself, just from my own experience. And I used to play a lot of these games solo back in the day anyhow. What I've done is I've become a bit more sophisticated and a bit more world-wise, and I've, you know, obviously had experience of other games, and I'm trying to inject that back into these games and kind of revitalize them, but in my kind of own image. I'm not really interested in any of the other commercial solo games, not from the point of view of I'm just feeling quite contemptuous of them, or, you know, that's a silly kind of view. I just want to do my own thing, and I'm quite happy just to come up with my own little mechanics. So as an overview to the campaign, the objective of this solo campaign is to play RuneQuest 2nd Edition using my own narrative-driven solo mechanic and in my own generated world setting. So that really just summarizes what I've just been talking about. I'm going to be drawing on the Judges Guild Gateway concept, which presented setting-agnostic adventures combined with RuneQuest rule systems. So we played a lot of the Judges Guild modules back in the day, and they had, in some instances, they had a setting-agnostic, which basically meant they didn't use Glorantha. So they called, like, the Lunar Empire a human empire, that type of thing. It was pretty well signposted what it was, but you didn't have to have the Gloranthan background. And, you know, I suppose if you go into RuneQuest, there's always just the assumption that you play in Glorantha. And so I wanted to try and challenge that assumption and say, no, we can do our own thing. You know, I'm going to have it very similar to Gloranthan, but it's not going to have say Orland, for example, or a Lunar Empire, but it might have something very similar to a Lunar Empire in its setup. The solo mechanic provides a series of options. At first, these are shaped by the preconceived setting parameters. So I do have some setting parameters, very high-level guidelines of what I want my setting to be like. And that's mainly to do with the overall geography, cultures, some of the religious side, although I'm less developed on that, some of the races, and just the overall kind of human culture in this setting that I've got in the back of my mind. But increasingly, these options will be informed by what is happening in terms of actual campaign development. So I'm hoping that the initial guidelines will be superseded by the actual events that are unraveling as we progress through the game. I want this solo campaign to be different from my other solo games being played. So I want it to be quite distinctly different from the AD&D First Edition game. So it's not going to be a case of just delving down into dungeons all the time, or doing our overland adventures and getting the encounter tables out. There will be elements of that in my RuneQuest game, but maybe it's not going to dominate it. It might have a much more to do, an emphasis on some of the, I suppose, the dynamics of the RuneQuest world, which is much more to do with the cults and the interaction of the characters in their development in these religious societies, and also just what the different objectives are in relation to some of the external threats. Like I've got in this game world, I've got chaos as being a very major threat, and what that is doing is it's acting as a catalyst to basically force the forces of what would be classified as good or law together into a kind of ramshackle alliance. And they're being kind of having their heads butted together, because usually they're quite antagonistic. So that's the kind of context that I want to, and the characters are going to be quite involved in that kind of that dimension. And you know, anything else on YouTube as well, because I want it just to be my own game. And I suppose maybe one of the things I have demonstrated with my traveller game and my AD&D one is that you could probably say, well, we probably haven't seen anybody else like Brian do his games on, you know, the fact that I just go at glacial speed. I'm talking away to myself. I'm completely unscripted. I don't, you know, this is the most script I have, is that my notes that I look at, you know, to do with the actual background or whatever. And you know, I don't even have, you know, my little playing pieces are pathetic. You know, they really aren't very much. I am for the RuneQuest one, I'm maybe going to try and get some distinctive pieces and different. I thought maybe some nice metallic ones like bronze and silver and gold. I'm going to have to see whether Amazon I can get something. I really fancy that kind of that look. You know, I've tried it here as well. I've got my background. I've got this is the back of a game board. It's actually the Russian campaign, 1941 to 45. So I've just cannibalized that from one of my Avalon Hill games, and I thought that is really quite nice. It's quite smooth and whatever. So I'm going to use that as the back. So it's all these little things. I'm just going to try and make it a wee bit distinctive. And then moving on to that, I think I can achieve this kind of unique view by having a unique take and an approach in terms of solo mechanics, which is this big idea I've got, and combine this with the special attributes of the RuneQuest system. And I think I'll really want to showcase what RuneQuest is all about. And I know other YouTube channels do that, and it's great, because they really, they show what a fantastic system is. But I want to show it in my own kind of way. And say that I can create a solo mechanic that is really integrated with the RuneQuest system and bring out the best in it. That's my kind of mission statement. And here is this a bit of the a few indications of what my background is. I'm going to have the campaign to be set in what I call the Great Vale, and all references to Glorantha are to be ignored in these books. So there'll be no more Glorantha stuff, but there'll still be the spirit of Glorantha, hopefully, in this what I call the Great Vale. This setting has its own societies, cultures, religions, and ecology. And these will be developed in more detail using the solo mechanic as we progress in the campaign. So I've got some headline information about these things, and what my solo mechanic will do, will refine them, and we'll be doing the option things. So we'll actually be deciding what individual kingdoms and cities and towns and settlements and places where non-humans are, and we'll be drilling down into those using this mechanic. I also, I think this is quite important, I want a darker aesthetic and a grimmer and grittier Bronze Dark Age version of the Gloranthan world setting. So I think when I was playing the Gloranthan version back in the late 70s, early 80s, I was always struck by maybe just it's almost like the sunniness of it. It always seemed to be warm and sunny, and there was like semi-deserty kind of grasslands, and everything just seemed to be like the sun out all the time, and it would just seem far more kind of optimistic and whatever. And I know there were grim aspects, there was chaos and all this and brews and horrible, hideous things. But maybe I just want to have a bit more of a kind of gritty kind of feel to it, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that, but hopefully just with the aesthetic that when I'm explaining things, and just some of the way that the monsters behave, and some of the places that I describe the characters come to, I can maybe inject some of that feel into it. Okay, so that really is what my overall objectives are. Now, just on the influences I have, and I think are particularly pertinent for RuneQuest, my literary influences, I think a very important one is Conan, Robert Howard, because I've always imagined the Glorantha and a kind of Bronze Age classical type, like ancient Greece or Rome, or maybe Rome when the barbarian kingdoms are starting to make it collapse internally. Ancient Greece, from probably the Mycenaean period all the way through the classical period. Maybe less of the Macedonian, Alexandrian period, but there's probably influences of that. I think of maybe the Italian peninsula when Rome was starting to, it became a republic, and just from moving away from being a kingdom, and it started conquering some of the cities round about on the Italian peninsula. The Celts, who kind of came in and invaded. There's a whole host of different cultures that are quite interesting, and they're all either Bronze Age or early Iron Age. They've all got a kind of classical view, and I always felt that Hyboria kind of summed up that. And I loved the Conan books. I read a great many of them, and I thought the actual setting, I always envisaged a kind of classical world. And I know I did talk about some of the medieval type societies, but again, I always put it just through a kind of classical eyes. I always saw like Greek hoplites rather than knights, if you see what I mean. And then leading on, Michael Moorcock and Elric and Coram. Oh, I love these books. These were, and I've read the Coram ones recently, and I still thought that was terrific. And Elric, and to me, they were quite kind of that sort of less of the medieval high fantasy type tropes, and more of the kind of just more a kind of cosmopolitan, ancient classical kind of aspect to societies and landscapes, and basically everything to do with their religions and magic. So that's a very rich vein, I think. And then I suppose the great granddaddy of it all, Homer, and the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I really enjoyed especially the Odyssey. I thought that the story is all about Odysseus, and we used to get that read to us at school. That really kind of sparked the imagination, and that stays with you. It keeps with you. The fire keeps burning. And then we come to the films and TV, and yeah, I've got this talk with the devil. Arnold Schwarzenegger in probably reprising one of his iconic roles, I think, and you can't really think of a better Conan. And I loved this film, Conan the Barbarian. It came out in 1982, so it came towards the end of our gaming of RuneQuest, because I think I must have finished about the end of 1982. But to me, this really just almost like set the benchmark of what that fantasy world and universe was all about. This validated everything that I'd been doing in RuneQuest. Just the way it's set out, that cult of Set, and all the different kingdoms and the barbarian cultures, and just the way Conan was presented as this kind of bare-chested, muscly adventurer. And everybody they met in the towns, they were all just it's just a bit of a riot half the time. And there was elements of medieval, but it just seemed very fantasy, if you can understand where that's coming from. And I thought this actually, this really basically was what it was all about. And before that, I'd been very enamored by the film Jason and the Argonauts, and that's had all the Harryhausen the stock animation, with those amazing things with the skeletons jumping about, and I can still remember them quite vividly. And that giant, I think it must have been a golem, iron golem, and was strutting around, and wasn't that a terrifying sight? And it still is. And I thought that was a terrific film. And again, it just had that kind of Cloranthan RuneQuest kind of feel about it. And another favourite of mine, The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, 1973. This is the one with Tom Baker in it as this scheming wizard. And it just had everything going for it, a very kind of mystical kind of, sailing on the seven seas, and it's all the different kind of exotic cultures. And it was completely non-medieval, none of this knights and shining armour type stuff. This is all high adventure on the seas. And then I had some TV inspiration. I had the first one was a series of documentaries by a TV historian called Michael Wood. He was an English historian. He was very inspirational to me when I was growing up. And in fact, one of the reasons why I actually did history at university, I can put down to Mr. Wood. And he did a fantastic series called In Search of the Dark Ages, which was all about Anglo-Saxon England, and it went from basically almost like Roman England up to the Norman Conquest, and this was very inspirational. And again, I see a lot of that in RuneQuest. A Dark Age culture, heroic warrior cultures, that kind of society. And then he also did another follow-up documentary called In Search of the Trojan War, which is all about basically trying to find whether there's any truth in the Trojan story and Troy in its existence. And this was fascinating. And again, it went across all the different lands that you'd expect to see in a kind of in a RuneQuest type setup. In fact, they're having Mycenae and Troy and all these ancient Greek warriors and heroes. That was very, very much like that. So that was the TV stuff. And then finally, there was another documentary later on, which again probably validated a lot of the stuff I've been watching, which is called The Celts. And I think the Celtic influence is quite important. Some of the tribes, they were very big in Europe. And in fact, they're almost like a rival civilization to the Romans. And if the Romans hadn't been powerful enough to conquer them, I think we might have been living in a Celtic Europe, which, my goodness, what a counterfactual that would be. And then my other gaming influences, I have, I've shown this off before. I've got my War Games rules. I love the War Games Research Group rules, who were the UK premier wargaming product. This is the 6th edition. I used to play the 5th edition. You know, talking about rules and tents, you know, that's what you've got here. We've got tables that are quite casualty calculations down to individual numbers of figures. You know, so you'd have figures, and then you'd have the number. You'd have to calculate the number of casualties represented on that figure. But you know, we loved it. And I did a lot of research of what Greek and Roman warfare was. You know, I got a lot of the stuff. I've got a more modern book, but I did have one of the ones that is recommended in the in this book, in the appendices. It talks about one of the, I think it's Peter Connolly, and Enemies of Rome, and this is almost like the successor to this. This is the John Worry warfare in the classical world, and it's got some fantastic illustrations. And just to show you, this, you know, look at that. That's kind of the aesthetic that I'm after. Is that kind of hoplite look with the helmet, the crested helmet, and the spear and that. And then if you're talking about a gritty Spartan look, my goodness, you know, maybe a bit of Gerard Butler in there, you know, Spartans. You know, look at that. You know, it's got the shield. You know, it's fantastic. So it's that kind of look that I want to get. You know, not as I say, not knights in shining armor. It's going to be, or even like chainmail and, you know, Norman helmets. It's going to be the full-on Greek hoplite look, with all that classical armor, or you know, kind of Celtic warriors with their funny shaped helmets and that sort of thing. And then moving on to the actual games that I played a lot of White Bear and Red Moon with the guy that ran the gaming group I was in, playing RuneQuest, and he had Nomad Gods as well, which was set in Prax, and that was with all the different tribes and how the interactions. And so they were kind of like a board game version of Major Conflicts. And then later on, I got the Avalon Hill Dragon Pass game, which is basically a kind of grown-up version of these Chaosium ones, making it a bit more nice for Avalon Hill. And there you see one of the classic bits of artwork there. And this was, you know, a beautiful game. I didn't really play it as much as I should. And, you know, I do plan to do a bit of playing of this later on, now that I've retired. Yeah, that was very inspirational. Had a lovely map inside that and I was even thinking of maybe using that as the background. But I thought, if you're not playing in Glorantha, why would you want a background of Glorantha in it, as a thing? So, but you know, I might have a change of heart if people are desperate to see my board. And then moving on to my actual RuneQuest prior experience and the gaming group I was in. And the years I've got, 1978 to 1982, I was really active with RuneQuest. And we used RuneQuest 1 predominantly because we did the majority of it at the start. And RuneQuest 2 came out in 78, and we were kind of late adopters because we were still quite wedded to RuneQuest 1. So that's when we kind of changed over, maybe 79, 80. And we initially started in Dragon Pass and the Prax, and then we got the Griffin Mountain book, and my goodness, that really opened up our vistas quite a bit in Glorantha, and we loved the Balazar, the Elder Wilds kind of stuff, and all the different, you know, that was a very well done book of how to design a region and have it as a living, thriving infrastructure. And that's kind of what I want to get to with my game, is to something that's just as good as Griffin Mountain. And it's got like living, breathing NPCs. It's got some vibrant communities that are believable. It's got some very interesting adventures and places to go. And it's got this almost like in your DNA, this mystical and magical and religious cult type feel roundabout that just brings out the magic of RuneQuest. And I think one of the things that helped me was, having this different experience was that it was a very different group of friends. And it's sometimes very funny that me explaining this, but it can sometimes come down to just what your taste of music is as being a differentiator. And I think I've explained in my AD&D one, I was very much into kind of punk bands, like the Stranglers, and post-punk bands like Susie and the Banshees, and The Cure, and The Fall, and all those very, very kind of pretty alternative type bands. This group were not really into that at all. They came from the point of view of Hawkwind and Yes, and some like prog stuff, and then they were really into Rush, and what was it, Rainbow, and it was kind of heavy metal type stuff. They liked Motorhead and ACD, and I found this really quite tiresome. But for the sake of playing the game, I just kind of listened to all this type of stuff, and it's really kind of strange. But when you are playing and you're listening to all this type of music, and it does actually make you feel slightly different when you're playing. So that kind of really differentiated for me what RuneQuest was. And I know it sounds a bit trite talking that music made you feel different, but I just remember distinctly thinking, God, this is weird, isn't it? Some of this kind of Jethro Tull or Hawkwind. I thought, my goodness, this is a bit left field. And you felt that Glorantha was kind of left field. If you're just playing an orthodox Dungeons and Dragons game, it's quite a bit different from a RuneQuest game. So I found as a result, I thought that I was more setting immersed experience, really, and exotic environment is probably a nice way of putting it. So I think I have to thank that experience for shaping how I approach RuneQuest now. And just on doing the bookkeeping on this, we played Apple Lane. We played that one. That's a 1978 one. Gringle's Pawn Shop and the Rainbow Catacombs, I think it was. Was it Caves? Rainbow Caves? With all the little newtlings and that awful troll that was in charge of it. Snakepike Hollow, I can't really remember that too much, but I just know it was pretty savage. This was the Judge's Guild thing, the Hell Pits of Nightfang. That was pretty scary stuff with this vampire. That was one of these agnostic ones where it wasn't set in Glorantha. Broken Tree Inn, likewise, I think that was to do with this big forest of elves. And they had all these weird kind of practices, and that's where I really quite enjoyed the elf side, because they really were quite different from any elves that you saw in Tolkien or whatever. It really drew out the distinctive, the Aldrami, why they were so different, and the fact that they were quite alien, that they are all drawn from trees and this kind of symbiotic relationship. The legendary Duck Tower, 1980, we played that. I can't honestly remember it very much. I just know we did it. Griffin Mountain was probably our pinnacle. We played that not to death, but we were coming more towards the end of our gaming, because we were reaching the stage in our school careers where we were having to do a lot more exams and getting towards the end, and some of the gaming group were disappearing, either leaving school or whatever, or we're all heading off to university. Our groups used Cults of Prax and Cults of Terror as the source material. And yeah, so we were pretty literate Gloranthans, I would say. But I think the main thing I got out of it was just a very different experience. And I took this forward with my own spin with Stormbringer, because I was really into Elric at the time. I thought it was just the best thing since sliced bread. I thought Elric was just an amazing anti-hero. His stories were so encapsulated. Stormbringer, the sword, and just everything about it in this kind of mythos. And I had to play it as soon as I heard there was a role-playing game, and it was all based on the RuneQuest system. What was not to like? So 1981 was dominated, and I exported that back out of the RuneQuest group back to my core gaming group, the ones that were all playing Chivalry and Sorcery and Space Opera and Aftermath and all these FGU ones, and they really liked the Stormbringer one, because that's the first time they'd ever been exposed to, I suppose, like a skill-based system and what would be called the basic role-playing system. And we had a lot of fun. We tend to be mainly set in the southern continent, and it always seemed to involve going into the jungle and discovering kind of lost tribes and lost kind of civilizations. And these I adapted this big AD&D module in White Dwarf to this amazing kind of jungle hideaway and hideout. And they had an absolute blast playing it, and there was a lot of fun. So that was a really good spin-off, and that's one where I exported it back or imported it to our group. So finally, just on the RuneQuest Classic Edition itself, this guy here, just bringing that one back into focus. I would say just looking at it from a top level perspective, this is a simulation, I would say. You have more realistic character development and world experience. It's probably less abstract and more immersive. That you could challenge this, but I would say it emphasizes these points: realism with the character development and the world. Even though it's a fantasy type setup, which might sound counterintuitive, I just felt it was quite more almost like quite a mature system that we were playing. It's a percentage-based system, and the skills and experience advancement was all based on percentages. And this skill system was very mature again, and the fact that you had to spend cash, and also you could use your experience to advance. It all seemed quite a profound difference to what AD&D was, and the level system, or even Chivalry and Sorcery for that matter. That again was based on an experience points and level system. There was a strong world to game connections in the game. History, mythology, cultures, they all have a deep influence on the gameplay and character development. I don't think I've experienced any other game that had such a profound effect on characters. The fact that if you were in Orlanth as an initiate, you kind of knew about it, and you almost had this kind of toolkit of how you should behave and what you should do. I want to try and bring that into my game, so that I've almost got pre-generated characters that we can select as a pool, and draw out maybe 3 or 4 as our party, and they'll have a bit of background that is shaped by what their previous experience is. The combat system is a joy. It attempts to recreate live action. It's got the hit location. It really is fun. It's got all sorts of interesting tables. It really needs to be played to be described. That's all I can say, and I'm hoping I'm going to have a lot of nice little sequences in that. Magic infuses everything. It's all about linkages to the divine, the mythos, and the runes, and I am going to try and explore that dimension much more in this game, and try to really kind of almost like see how the characters can understand the secrets of the universe type thing. It sounds really quite shock and awe type thing, but I think I want to try and push that dimension. The cults and the belief system are a key element of RuneQuest flavor, with membership of religious societies aspire to. So that really is quite almost like the raison d'etre of characters are to become rune priests and rune masters, or very high up in, they say, the guilds and whatever. I'm going to try and draw that out and see how my solo mechanic can adjust to that and modulate it. And then, of course, we've got all these unique monsters. We've got some standard fantasy fare, but we've got some very interesting ones. You know, my goodness, ducks and Morocanth and brews and all that type of stuff. You know, that's all very entertaining to experience. So, you know, we've really got quite a cocktail of very entertaining elements that we can draw on. So that really was everything I wanted to do on the overall objectives, all of what my influences were. And I really just want to just finish with maybe just some high level view on where I'm going to go next time. I'm going to get stuck into the actual campaign. I'm going to give a high level of what my solo mechanic is. I'm going to talk about my world and some of the basic parameters and guiding principles, because this world isn't going to be set out in detail at this stage. It's just going to be headline items like the area and maybe some of the origin story and the fact that it's got conflict and there are gods, but you're not really going to get much more. We're going to have to use my solo mechanic to draw out that, and that will be fed into the game as we progress. So I've got a kind of stage plan that I'll call it a schedule of events I have. So anybody that is into project management will know about a schedule of events, and that basically is a kind of timetable, a master timetable that says this should be happening then, and if it doesn't happen, something else needs to happen. Or, you know, it's got a lot of like dependencies and whatever, and I'll be bringing in all my solo mechanic to try and modulate that, and as we get through. So I think I've blinded you with science enough. I'm just going to leave it with the fact that I'm quite excited about this, just as excited as I was about the AD&D one, and I'm having an absolute blast with that. I said I wouldn't do as many, and I think I have ended up doing 4 or 5 this week. I just can't stop myself. I think the only way I'm going to stop doing it is probably going on holiday and things, which is kind of imminent. So if you don't see any videos for a few days, you know that Brian's away or doing something. And the Traveller one, I'm really just I have started that, and I've had an absolute blast doing the Traveller one. I've really enjoyed the world creation. I've really enjoyed the characters. I've got some very interesting party, and they've got a nice little backstory. I love the first world they're on, Tarot, and this concept that I've kind of dreamed up of the John Wick light Dragon Hotel. I think I'm really enjoying that and executing it in a game environment. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog. I think that's telling me that I've probably talked enough. That's what happens when you talk away for 40 odd minutes non-stop. Okay, right. Next one, as I say, I'm going to go through some of the details, and we might even get to the point where we can start generating some characters, the initial setting, and just get everything starting to roll in the RuneQuest universe, in the Great Vale. That's where we're going to be, and I'm hopefully going to make. I can't aspire to get anywhere near Glorantha, but I can maybe make it within a kind of more constrained environment, a nice little setting that maybe rivals something like Griffin Mountain and Balazar and the Elder Wilds. That would make me very happy if I could get to that kind of level. Okay, well, that just leaves me to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.